Hello. We're back again with another episode of CRT Sound System, and we've got episode. Let me check the number on it. Episode 59, and we're talking about Majin Tensei and Majin Tensei 2. Here, as always, with Reese. Reese, how are you?
Oh, I'm just great. I'm fantastic.
All things considered, pretty
All
good.
things considered, I am heavenly. I'm a
Okay.
golden divine god that is summoned through the computer.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. And we have a guest, returning guest, Shannon. Shannon, how are you?
Doing great, all things considered, as you've been saying. Very excited to be back.
Excellent. Yeah, glad to have you back. And again, thank you so much for jumping in on short notice. We're sort of flying by the seat of our pants this month, just because I decided to go monthly go weekly for the month. So I'm just sort of like editing as we go, basically. We're talking about Majin Tensei and Majin Tensei 2. So these are two sort of sub games within the Megami Tensei series. They're more like a strategy RPG style. The first one is a very sort of Fire Emblem, like pretty much Fire Emblem with the numbers filed off in a lot of ways in terms of like gameplay. And then the second one, as I was mentioning to you before the recording started, is sort of like more closer to like a front mission or a tactics ogre in terms of its gameplay. But they're both really, really interesting, and the main reason I want to talk about them though is the soundtracks, which are absolutely fucking incredible. Some of the best soundtracks on the Super Nintendo, and I really think, and not enough people are sort of aware of them. And one of the reasons I sort of decided to do this Megami Tensei month was because I wanted to highlight, in particular, this and Tokyo Mirage Sessions as two like really undersung soundtracks within a series that's well known, probably as much for its soundtracks as for its games. And I just want people to be able to enjoy good music. So here we are.
It's there's a crazy spread of these games beyond the Persona and mainline SMT games. That shocks even me that who looked them up and sort of like went through it and was like, wow, this is so cool. I can't, so much of it is just falls away from my brain because I don't look into each individual one. One time in the dirtbag leftist Discord forever ago, I said I was gonna play every single Megami Tensei game, and the one response I got to that made me laugh was somebody just replying and going, "Please don't do that. Please don't do that. It's too many."
It is, and I mean, you've mentioned before playing the on Shannon's previous episode and the Persona 3 episode, and also last week. Just that you have played the very first Megami Tensei on the NES, which I don't know anybody else who's actually done that.
I have, and it was good. It's a very bare bones for, it's great for the time, but now it's very bare bones dungeon crawler. But that, to me, it just seemed like less evil wizardry, so I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But that's why this spoke to me so much. I was too addled to really prepare for this episode, but I did do a little bit of research, and I downloaded the ROM. And this seems like my fucking jam. This looks so fun.
It's a really cool little strategy RPG. I made a couple of Blue Sky posts about it during the week and was like, this is more of a Fire Emblem game than the actual crossover with Fire Emblem that they did, which we discussed last week. And, that's... I do love that game, as anybody who will have listened to that episode by now has probably well aware. That game is amazing, but its relation to Fire Emblem is incidental at best, I would say. Whereas this game just really feels like a reskin of Fire Emblem, just with some with some really nice battle graphics and really good sprite work, all done up as a Megami Tensei.
Yeah.
For yourself, Teeps, what's your sort of experience with this series, if any?
All right, so I am a very large Megami Tensei fan in general. So everything from the NES games, I dabbled. I did not complete the first NES game, and I still want to beat Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2, especially 2. But I haven't dabbled as much with Majin Tensei as I would like, which is a shame because I'm a huge turn-based strategy game fan, and
yeah,
I do enjoy the games a lot. I just haven't quite gotten to them. I do agree that a lot of these side soundtracks don't get enough love. Even stuff like Mac and X, I feel like people should talk about a little bit more.
Oh, I like Mac and X a lot. That's definitely a future episode, I think. Yeah.
And one of my favorites is Proto Persona, or SMT if. And that soundtrack was also quite good, in my opinion. But in my quick trying to get ready, I listened to the soundtrack for the first game. The second game tracks will be completely blind, but I'm very excited to talk about them because they were fantastic all the way through.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it's one of those soundtracks that as soon as I listened to it, it just hit me like a truck. So I just posted in the chat there a picture of my cartridge of this game. This is how I discovered the game. I walked into a random shop in Cork in Ireland, just to, obviously in Ireland, but just to clarify that, this is not a place where you're likely to find many Japanese games. I saw this cartridge with the label and it looked cool as shit because there's just like a demon on it, and I saw the Atlas logo and I was like, well, this is bound to be interesting, whatever the fuck it is. And then got home and discovered it was a Megami Tensei game, and I was like, okay, even better. This is just like so I slapped it into my my shitty old Super Nintendo and fired it up, and obviously the entire game is in Japanese, so I found it completely inscrutable. But the first thing that jumped out to me then was just how good the battle music is. And because this game is pretty much like 95% battles, all of the music is battle music and all of it is fucking incredible. And it has this thing of like each turn will play a different track, depending on like whether it's an enemy turn or a neutral turn or your own turn, and then like it seems to be sort of random from stage to stage which tracks it will actually play. But like nearly every track in this game is a battle theme, and each one of them fucking rules. So the music in this game, again, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is because it's all by a man by the name of Hidehito Aoki, who was sort of one of the early sort of Atlas composers. His names are around a lot, but probably his best known work is the original Persona, and like his music is still heard to this day in various Persona games and spin-offs. Like we had we had the Persona Q episode a couple of weeks ago, and like in that soundtrack you see his name pop up a few times in remixes and rearrangements. And tragically, he died quite young. And it's really one of those weird sort of like just when somebody dies very young like that, and they were clearly so incredibly talented. There's a real shift then in sort of where the music of this series went after that. Because you really got the feeling that like he was the future of this sort of series, and then for better or worse, probably more for the better, I don't know, it's hard to say, but Meguro sort of became the main guy behind Persona in particular, but also just the Megami Tensei sound. And I think it's one of those things where it's quite sort of tragic that his legacy is sort of relegated to a couple of these side games, and the first Persona, which nobody actually played. Because that series didn't really get popular until 3.
Yeah, everybody that doesn't like the first 2 games is wrong, is first of all.
True.
But I do agree that it would have been wonderful to see, like, I would have loved to hear SMT3 soundtrack through Aoki's ears, or, through what their music, right?
Yeah, it does feel sort of morbid to like to speculate on that, but I guess it's just one of those things where you hear somebody who's this talented and you're like, you can't help but wonder what if.
Right. I mean, I can imagine walking in and some of these tracks performed by instruments live, like in a grungy club that plays like oh my goodness, industrial and stuff. That's what I
Industrial
was
and
looking for.
synthwave and all that kind of shit. Yeah.
100%. I myself back in my youth in my trip pants and band shirts would have rocked out, like it's
Yeah,
I don't know, it's just everything's really cohesive, and it feels like he had like a plan with everything that he executed to the best of his ability using the Super Nintendo, which I know you're going to talk about, but the things that he does with that just
the way the sounds he's able to wrangle out of the Super Nintendo is genuinely kind of like it's I think maybe it's like only him and Yuzo Koshiro seem to be able to manage this. And like that's high praise indeed. I think we'll probably just we'll probably jump into the first block of tracks just because I want people to sort of hear where the sounds that he's sort of getting out of this before we maybe talk about it a little bit more to give them some context, because like as I said, there's a real sort of industrial sort of synthy even techno at some points like sound to all of this, and like it sounds like not like something you'd find in a club, but it sounds so close to what you could get in a club in the Terminator. It's like it's definitely like the dance at the end of the world sort of post-apocalyptic kind of thing that it's got going on, that like that really really fits with the sort of the aesthetic of like early Shin Megami Tensei and Megami Tensei games, that like it's something that's sort of lost in the Persona series being so popular, but like the fact that all of these games take place in a post-apocalypse of some sort, or they start off pre-apocalypse and then some point in the game they become a post-apocalypse. You just end up with this sort of like this sort of party at the end of the world vibe that's going on with a lot of these tracks.
For sure.
So we'll jump into the first block. So these are all tracks from the first game, and again, most of these are battle tracks. And a lot of them have great song titles. So first track is Scene of Carnage. Second track is Chaotic Law. Then The Wrath of God, Devil Dance, Bicarbonate of Face, which is probably my favorite song title that's ever been featured in a video game.
That's incredible.
And then it's amazing. And then the last track is JUDEX. talking a lot during the break just about the about various things, but the synths that are the samples, I guess, rather than the synths that Aoki is using throughout these games are just fucking so good. Like he's wrangling shit out of the Super Nintendo hardware that I don't think anybody else was doing, and I still don't fully understand it to the point where I'm listening to it. I'm like, am I just listening to a really, really good arrangement rather than rather than the actual hardware recording? Because like, yeah, some of these just sound so good. Like the Super Nintendo is sort of known for a very silly bass sound, but the bass throughout this soundtrack is just fucking amazing. It's got a real sort of heft to it, rather than the sort of very high pitched slap bass that you get in a lot of other games.
Yeah, the specifically in songs like Chaotic Law or Devil Dance, we got to really hear that bass get utilized in almost kind of funky a little bit.
There's definitely like a funk element to it. Like, and again, like that, there's a sense that, like, these are all battle themes, and you often only hear them sort of in your own turn or only in your enemy turn. So like, you're not hearing the full track a lot of the time, but like, there's definitely just a sense that this is like club music. That like in the downtime between whatever missions they're doing, that when people are hanging out in their underground bars, that they're listening to this shit. It's it's a really good sort of aesthetic choice, and it really enhances the sort of, again, that sort of post-apocalyptic vibe that these two games have. I think maybe the second one probably has a little bit more of that, for reasons we'll get into later, because the plot is a little bit thin in this first game. It's there is a full English translation out there if you want to play it, but like honestly, you don't need really. The main thing you just need the English for is just so that you can read the menus. That's like the biggest thing, is just like, so you know what stats you're doing or what actions you're taking. Like that's the biggest reason you'd want to have the English patch for this.
Well, it's you will want every piece of information available to you. And so you'll summon your demons and it'll say something like strong in forest. And it's just like I assume you're going to really want to know as time goes on and you're doing the tactics aspect of it, that like, oh, we're going to mount this the battle in the forest, and I'm going to summon my bull there, and they're fucked. They're going to be so fucked in the forest. And this stuff I read too is that there's a lot of kind of like weird hidden stuff that's barely hinted on.
Oh my goodness.
So you're going to want to, I think, every piece of information. But for the raw tactics of it, just so long as you know what the move button is, what the attack button is, that sort of stuff, you can absolutely get by.
I would actually recommend, there's a YouTuber called Marsh, who does a lot of like playthroughs of Megami Tensei games in particular, and he's got a really good one on the first Majin Tensei, and it does go into like the all the secret stuff and like the true ending, and how you access it is absolutely fucking stupid. It requires you basically to find a very specific spot on a specific map that is in no way marked. It doesn't require you to ever go there. And
is this the one where you have to go to the like upper right corner?
Yeah, if you're like right up to the upper right corner of a map to like to talk to a character on a square. Like the only way you would know it was there is if you specifically went and ended your turn on that square. Like there's no other way to know that unless you had basically a guide to it. And not only do you have to do that, but you have to do it 3 times. Because like you have to talk to this character, then do some actions, then come back after doing a couple of maps, talk to them again, and then do that all over again. So like getting the true ending in this game is completely just it's, I don't know how you're supposed to find it on your own. And like that, because it's sort of a very Fire Emblem-y style game, all of the maps are absolutely fucking huge. Which does make the sort of the turn economy stuff can be quite tedious at times, especially when you get into the really, really big maps. Like just, moving your dudes just the maximum amount of squares that you can move them, and then just ending your turn for everybody because you can't take any actions. And doing that for 3 turns, and then maybe getting to fight a couple of guys.
Yeah.
Is it one of my problems with Fire Emblem is that sort of gameplay, and it definitely crops up here a bit too. But like, if that's your jam, if you like sort of Fire Emblem games, I do think that there's definitely a lot you can get out of this. Especially because, like I said, the music is so good. The battle sprites are gorgeous. They're some of the nicest sprites you'll see on the Super Nintendo. Like when it transitions to like a battle screen, you get these massive, like really, really detailed sprites of the like various monsters and stuff. And yeah, that's definitely like if you like good sprite work, definitely worth looking into as well.
The sprites are actually insane.
Yeah.
They because especially you go to the battle map, and it's all very
abstracted, sort of
very
like
Dragon Warrior, like Famicom Dragon Warrior character sprites, and they're not bad, but it's very, very, very simple. And then you'll go into battle, and it's just like the most beautiful, like a terrifyingly beautiful elf with a sword will come in front of you, and it just like evoke emotions. You're just like, how this is crazy. They were doing 16-bit pixel art on this level, and the proportions are great. It's really engaging. I would say, other than the music, it's sort of like that definitely would propel me, is just to see what's going on, see the next dude or creature or terrifying goddess of death.
Yeah, the art is beautiful, and if I remember correctly, the first game, your first ally is Cerberus, yeah?
yes.
Yeah.
They give you like a really overpowered Cerberus to start off the game with. It is a bit of it does make some of those early maps a bit less of a chore for sure. But then it's one of those things where if you end up relying on him too much, you become really underpowered later in the game. But I think it's one of those things where the intention is for you to eventually just fuse him with something else. Because I suppose it's worth mentioning the game does have a fusion system. But the way it works is actually you move your monsters from one tile like onto the monster on the tile you want to fuse with. And then it tells you what the fusion monster is going to be, and you can choose whether you want to do it or not. And it's a cool little system, letting you to sort of do that in the middle of battles. Sort of adds an extra tactical element to it.
Well, it's something that I do not recommend that Megami Tensei fans do is read the original Digital Devil story. But it's interesting to me how the early games are kind of rooted in that, because in those games, like Cerberus, you have a relation. The main character has a relationship with Cerberus.
Okay.
And I believe the character you find by standing in some random place is, I apologize if I misspeak, but Izanami, I believe, is the name of the goddess, and it's all about sort of Izanami and Izanagi's sort of relationship with the world as they are born into it, and play major parts in its destruction. And it's interesting. It's like a absolutely insane thing to create a franchise out of, and it's also even more insane to like keep to the lore for as long as they did, because like at this point, sort of like those, you'll find Cerberus and Izanami in the other games as part of the Digital Devils, but they don't play as much of a big part, at least in my limited experience.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to mention that, because I feel it's kind of like a weird notion to it, is like part of what you're bringing to Majin Tensei is the understanding that you're sort of doing a generic version of the novel, which is awful.
I second what Reese is saying on the novel. I can't get those days back. I can't recover what was lost. But yeah, that is true. The first few games really did try to keep in touch with that, except your main character is never as much of a pile of dung as the main character from the books.
I mean, you could not get the game okayed by Nintendo if you portrayed a character that sucked as much shit as that dude.
That's very true. There is a lot of shit getting sucked.
Yeah,
It's oh goodness. But you know what? Out of that pile of dung, a phoenix rose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really did. Where they just, because it's like that's the core idea of it, I think, is so refreshing. Sort of like mid 80s representation of being able to program a computer to do magic, and sort of like
I love that shit.
the very effective presentation of magic and technology as one, creating this world, I think is incredibly effective. And I think that's the one thing in the book, like they don't go into it. It's just sort of like the opening moments of it. I think there's a compelling vibe to the way the guy figures out how to create digital magic, and like how to program occult symbols so it affects stuff. And then after that, he just has like a Pokemon summoning wrist thing. But and so I think that they eventually just honed into that important element, and that's kind of the one thing you have in all the games. You're able to summon Aphrodite, and then your face melts off because
with an app on your phone or whatever. Yeah, it's funny how that sort of in the more recent games it has just been like, oh, here's an app for your phone that you download that you're just like, it'll just get you some demons if you want them. Yeah, no, that's sort of one of the biggest draws of the series as a whole to me, was that sort of that, like, yeah, the sort of technomancy, I guess is what you'd call it, where like, yeah, you're doing demon shit, but it's all through computers. Yeah, it's very sort of compelling as an aesthetic. And yeah, I'm glad I've never read the book, I guess is what I'm saying. Because that does sound like the only interesting thing. I've always heard that like it's a tough read because that main character is a fucking complete piece of shit. And all that, and like, yeah, it's good that sort of Atlas were smart enough to be like, okay, well, here are the interesting elements from this story, and let's fucking throw everything else away and do completely different shit with this.
Absolutely. And I think too, what I like about these earlier games, we talked about it some in the first break, but it takes that sort of like ultra gore vibe to it, and you hear it in the music and sort of the vibe of the game as well, where they're not replicating any of that, but it is much more of a horror game. They're much more of a horror series early on, to where it still will go there in the later games, but they can't keep doing that over and over, and it has to be a lot more palatable. So you'll have stuff like tough subjects in Persona 5, but they're not gonna have it all be about that.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's hard to get sort of mass market, especially back in these days when you've got like Nintendo being really, really overly concerned about but like religious symbolism in their video games. like these games are sort of very upfront about just being like, well, here's every religious symbolism you can think of piled up into one.
Yeah.
You know, it makes a lot of sense that in order for these to sort of start coming over to the West and sort of breaking through to people, you know, they sort of dialed back on that a little bit. Certainly in like outside of the monster designs in terms of like the settings and the characters and stuff like that. That it became less focused on sort of occult stuff and that religious symbolism and more on like character stuff, at least say like just sort of in terms of presentation. And like to the point where, like, as I say, Persona 5 has some darker plot elements and stuff like that, but almost completely drops any sense that there's something occult happening other than like your sort of your personas.
Yeah.
Anyway, with that, another ramble about Persona games over. I feel like this month, a lot of this month has just been us complaining about Persona not being as good as Shin Megami Tensei.
I mean, Persona can stand the heat.
Yeah, it's got enough shooters. So.
Exactly.
It's how you know we're old, honestly.
Yeah, that's yeah. That's
which
fair.
We are.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, like Persona 3 was my first game in the series, and that's really only because none of the other games came out here. I've probably mentioned it before, but like the very first one of these I ever saw was Nocturne, and it wasn't even titled Shin Megami Tensei here. It had a completely different title. Jesus, I gotta have to look that up now because it's going to annoy me. Oh, it was just called Lucifer's Call in PAL regions. Which, like, again, how would you know that this was supposed to be something you should be paying attention to? But yeah, we shall go into the next block of tracks, I think. So again, from the first Majin Tensei game, we've got Omega, Flame Up Fragment, Immortally Shop Rag, and then the last track is an arranged version of The Wrath of God.
I should play through these Majin Tensei games fully now.
I think you should. I think you would get a lot about it. You like the misery of a fucking mid-90s RPG.
Oh, buddy, do I? Yeah. I kind of dislike how easy stuff is now. I kind of want to be punched in the throat, you know?
I mean, yeah, like I was we're just going to continue right through, I think, but I've been playing Persona 3 Reload a lot. And having a great time with it. I think it's a really sort of good marriage of the stuff I like about Persona 3 and the stuff I like about Persona 5, but without a lot of the stuff I dislike about both games. But like one of the big sort of problems I have with it is that they rebalanced the combat in this really weird way where they gave you your characters a bunch of extra shit, and like didn't do anything with the bosses or anything like that. So like the bosses are almost exactly the same as they were in 3, but you now are just so much more overpowered with like the theurgies and stuff like that, and it really just sort of like it makes the game so much sort of easier to get through.
Yeah, it does. And also, I think I'm a sicko, but I kind of upset that I can control my party members. And
you've mentioned that before, and I think that's real. We can't condone that in this podcast. I'm sorry.
We talked about this last time, I believe. As is our the great relish that we take in especially a dungeon crawler just being as mean as fuck to us. Just I want you know, the game's not. You're not a real dungeon crawler unless you have a trap that sends you back to the beginning of the dungeon. You know, negating 3 hours of progress. Maybe that's just me.
Exactly. And you know what? I think them taking out reversals of your social links is cowardice. Absolute cowardice. If you suck at talking to people, you deserve to lose everything.
Exactly.
Yes. And lastly, there's a game called Dungeon Encounters that came out like last year or the year before. That's a really fun dungeon dive, and you can go negative money, and a thief can take so much that you go like 15,000 in debt or something. And it's real hard to climb back from that.
That's fun.
Setting up payment plans, dodging calls in game. Let's go.
Waiting 7 years for it to drop off. Yeah.
Just trying to move to Canada to get away from it. But yeah, I really want to talk about that arrangement of I forget even the name of it now. Was the arrangement of the Wrath of God? Like that goes so hard, and yeah, you were saying during the break, Shannon, that like you fell asleep listening to this soundtrack earlier today and woke up to that, which sounds like a fucking a rough thing to wake up to, right? For sure.
I wake up and expect some Evil Dead looking motherfuckers just staring at me, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, just like even just to compare it to the original, I think is quite interesting because you know I've talked a bit about how like the Super Nintendo is putting in a lot of work to get these sounds out, I think, and it's like you listen to that arranged version and it's like the synth sounds are not that much different. You know, they're quite accurate to the original sound, even though obviously it's a new arrangement and there's a lot of extra stuff going on in the track. But like the bits where it is sort of calling back to the original, like it's a real testament to how good the Super Nintendo sounds in this game. That like even the sort of properly arranged versions, and we'll listen to a few more in the next block, like how close they can sound at times. You know, it's real good shit. The other thing as well is the fucking, again, to just talk about the bass lines in the two middle tracks in that block, Flame Up Fragment and Immortally Shoprag. Again, just like he's doing a lot of really good funky bass stuff in this soundtrack. And that sort of translates over to a lot of the early Persona 1 stuff as well. I think probably Persona 1's has two soundtracks. It has the original soundtrack and the one for the PSP re-release. Is probably better known for that re-release now than the original soundtrack, but like the original soundtrack is really well going back to get that sort of. It's much closer to the classic Shin Megami Tensei sound than it is to the modern sound.
Yeah, and I really liked a lot of the usage of the bass, like you said, and specifically, and I think it was "Flame Up" was the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
Man, all three of us at one point during that song were like, "Man, this fucking slaps."
Yeah. it's other fucking worldly. You know.
Yeah.
And this is my first time listening to it, and I'm just like, and we're chatting and stuff, but also I've been very rudely, Teeps has been explaining has very erudite takes on fighting games and sort of the tournament community and stuff, and I'm just tuning out to the bass lines, being like, yeah, that's right, I'm a digital devil summoner, but a good one that's nice.
Yeah, it's really easy to just get into the vibes of these ones, like, and yeah, it's it's really sort of my mission with this podcast in a lot of ways is just getting people to listen to stuff that they've never heard of before. So like, I'm really glad when I bring a soundtrack to you, Reese, as my sort of like sounding board for the audience. And then you're like, yeah, this is fucking amazing shit. I love it. Like,
that is what is so wonderful. I mean, I am not the most musical gal out there. But I love to listen to it as does everybody, including dogs and cats.
Yeah.
And just the ability to have my mind expanded every 1 or 2 weeks here on this podcast with just someone that's just like, I've never heard of this game, I've never heard of this soundtrack. I fucking got my soul projected to another dimension listening to it for research. It's great. Yeah, this falls well in there, especially sort of like, I've always known like these games have a reputation for excellent soundtracks, but it's very interesting seeing how sort of like the different games are delineated. I won't bring up the P word, but like this game having such a much more evil vibe, not not as doomy as some songs of the genre are, but I think you mentioned Terminator before,
Yeah.
Tom, and I can absolutely imagine listening to this as while Tech Noir is scrawled above the bar in a shitty jive joint, just dancing my heart out. It is such a fucking jam, and it's so different from Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which is such a pop, resplendent pop, joyful experience with a little bit of darkness in there. But honestly, I was just in happy jam time for that one. And so it's interesting, and going to PQ3, or Q2 rather, sorry, and just it being like an extension of that franchise, which I said I wouldn't talk about, and I'm talking about it. Is also just it's incredible across the board, and it's the previous episodes we've done on the games of the series have been great. It's crazy the volume of music out there that is only only rivaled by other truly massive Japanese franchises in sort of like scope and consistency. But it's like it feels set apart from those a little bit for me, just because of its origin, its horror origins.
Yeah, it's a series that, in my opinion, like the big umbrella is a lot darker in general. It wants to look more at ideas of morality and less about the characters in it, which is a big difference in the writing for other big series, even avoiding the P word, right? Let's think about stuff like Pokemon, the obvious monster tamer thing.
Yeah.
Like nobody talks about the moral implications of Pokemon unless they're talking about Black and White, and it's very shallow. Everybody talks about the characters, your Brocks, your Gary Oaks, whatever. And there are some characters in the SMT series that people care about, but mostly they just talk about how the different alignment routes looked or how the game sounded and or played or things like that. And the overall atmosphere, and it's something that this soundtrack catches, is what I think is SMT's strength. Like this plodding, dim, emotionally draining experience, and it's not like a fun journey. You're crawling through this apocalypse. You're trying to survive. Like and it really pulls that out, right? Like when I picture people, like a group of people sitting down and playing or like dancing or whatever. For some reason, if you guys have ever heard of Repo the Genetic Opera, I just picture those people. Those are the SMT heads,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely that kind of series for sure.
It's that's really true. It can be hard to get a beat on some of the games in the series, other than the mechanics. It always feels like there is an RPG vibe to some degree, unless it's really pushing to be out there, like the rhythm games. But even then, like, rhythm games have a sort of they are definitely more closely related than I think they are largely given credit for. Just in terms of sort of like they're both series for grognards, DDR heads, certainly are kind of in the same boat, trying to full combo stuff as people doing like Elden Ring challenge runs, or people who comb through Final Fantasy to like for every detail about every weapon, into circle every square about what this and that could be as a bug. So I think it's a very interesting franchise to me in both its consistency and variety, and sort of like weird feedback loop based around the vibes, the gameplay, the what the flow. That's what we call that, and the vibes.
Yeah, for sure. And part of it is that plotting vibe is like the early games, you would run out of resources by walking around, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not like the newer ones where there isn't any of that. And I think there are a couple resources in Majin Tensei you need to pay attention to as well. And I do feel like the music helps do that, because like you have this pounding bass line, these synths, this stuff making it feel like I have to hurry, I have to do this stuff, but if I'm not careful, I'm going to die. And it's just this beautiful encapsulation of like helplessness and trying to force your way through. And I think next to maybe Metroid, that this is one of the best like series at pulling that out for me. I still haven't found a game besides Super Metroid that makes me feel so alone, honestly. But these SMT games come very close.
God, I cannot begin to unpack my thoughts on Metroid. I would completely unravel. The well, I agree and I love it. The thing, I agree with that, and I think too it absolutely, we always talk about how the music enhances the games, but I think it's in this game especially, how it kind of like sets the stage in a very interesting way. It doesn't make it like transcendent in the way some games do. Not to say the music isn't great, but it does make you sort of like puts you in the right frame of mind, where that you have all your superpowered RPG hero, and this ain't your lovey fluffy Final Fantasy. This is the end of the world, and there's a bunch of fucked up demons and pixies and stuff. And I feel like without that stage being set, it would seem just infinitely more grim. Is just like, what are we doing here? Why are we bothering to experience this hell? Why do we hurt ourselves like that? And you know, it's just I as a wizardry enjoyer, you know, you can enjoy games like that, but I think it definitely elevates it and makes it more the video game series rather than the absolutely the maybe the worst book I've ever read.
Yeah. I do think it's sort of interesting as well that it's like, yeah, in this first game, like the music is what it is just because everything is battles. Like there's very few cutscenes. Like there's no cutscenes to speak of at all, really. But there's very little dialogue, especially early on in the game. You're sort of just plopped into the world and expected to just move through it until some story happens at you.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, so it's sort of it of that isolation thing. It does sort of feel funny where you're just like you're trying to figure out what your sort of role in the world is, and all you've really got is you and like one or two other characters that you meet while you're exploring, and the demons that live in your computer. So it's sort of like, being online.
Yeah, exactly, like being online.
But like, yeah, it's an interesting sort of a way that it expresses that sort of that sense through the music in like, you never have the chance to stop moving, so the music is always propelling you forward, because your characters are always just you go from map node to fight demons, and you sort of talk to a couple of bosses here and there, but for the most part you're propelled through the world, and the music sort of feels like it's helping push you through it rather than sort of heightening an emotional moment in the story or something like that, which would be a sort of something that you'd expect in again your Final Fantasies or whatever. So like, yeah, so you just end up with this just very fucking rockin' soundtrack.
Exactly, and it's I mean, based on considering the earlier games were largely dungeon crawlers, that this is still kind of rooted in that. People who enjoyed games from this series probably were less interested in cutscenes, but it still kind of has similar, if the presentation is lateral kind of gameplay.
Indeed. All right, so I think we're going to jump into the last block of tracks from Majin Tensei 1. So all of these are arrangements. So they're from an album called Atlas Best Selection Megami Sekai Mega 10 World, which is a lot of stuff, but it's just sort of like a compilation album of some early Megami Tensei games, and just arrangements of those. So as near as I could tell, there's nobody credited for these arrangements on this album.
What a surprise.
So, yeah. Oh no, sorry, I found somebody here. Is Hideyuki Tsunoda. He's not credited on the on the page that I was looking at before, but here he is. So these tracks again are Chaotic Law, Devil Dance, and Scenes of Carnage. those arrangements are all fucking just so good.
Oh, bangers! Yeah, it reminds me of the episode you had me on where you had the some of the Persona 3 Dancing All Night arrangements on there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like it's really fun to see different people's takes on tracks and like just even though that's much more of trying to elevate instead of trying to change, and I think it did a really good job.
Yeah, no, I think they're like they don't really do much with the actual composition. It's just sort of making some of the samples a bit better and like changing some of the instruments to real instruments. Like you got some really nice shredding guitar solos in some of those ones, and some nice like proper keyboards and things like that. So it's like it's more of a heightening than it is anything else. But yeah, one of the things I love to do when I'm sort of looking into a game is sort of dig into some interesting arrangements or remixes that I can find, because I think it just spices up an episode nicely. It's just especially for like Super Nintendo games as well, because so many of them do have like arranged soundtracks to sort of enhance the sounds, but like. As I mentioned at the start, there's parts in these games where I'm listening to like the originals, and I'm like, am I sure this isn't an arrangement that somebody's done? Because like there's no way this fucking Super Nintendo sounds this good.
Yeah, you listen to that and you're just like, how much of this was the sample channel? Like, did
the Super Nintendo is entirely sample based, as far as I'm aware. I don't think it has any sort of PCM or synthesizing. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, you're correct with that.
Yeah, so it's not like the NES, which are like some other systems which do have like a specific channel assigned for samples. Like, it's the entire chip is for samples in this. So like,
I feel shamed for not knowing the architecture. Not shamed by you. But internally, I'm just like, how could I not know that?
I think that's just like that's a piece of information for only really stupid nerds. So apologies to all the stupid nerds listening to that. You were right to correct. You were fucking right to correct her, Tom. She was wrong.
That's definitely what our relationship is like.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's such a fucking good game. Good game, good music, definitely. Like, if you're in any way interested in strategy RPGs, or like if you played like the fucking Devil Survivor SRPGs, like if you were like, oh, I want like a bit more of that, like it's probably not a bad idea to track these down. I've been playing the two of them, the first one mostly on my analog pocket with the translation, and yeah, it's just been a good time all week.
Absolutely. I mean, what the interesting thing about this soundtrack to me is that, similar to Yuzo Koshiro, it's a soundtrack that manages to defy the Super Nintendo's reputation for having more kind of like tinny, sort of like better for melody tracks, and like, well, Genesis was like the crunchy. Games had better bass on the Genesis, is I think the pervading opinion. And so it's and although I prefer this SNES sound chip, I kind of got to agree. But this defies all expectations for what I think of when I hear a Super Nintendo game. I honestly cannot in my head, except for a couple of the samples that sound like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles drums.
Yeah,
I cannot make it sound. It doesn't sound like a SNES chip at all to me.
Yeah, there's a couple of like Donkey Kong Country sounding samples in this that you definitely hear. But I think maybe that's just like stuff that's like, this is the default sample library, so we're just using some of these. Yeah. But like, yeah, whatever he did for this, like I don't know, is it like a custom sample set or what? But yeah, it's really, really something. And similarly for the second game, so we haven't really talked a lot about the second game. it's as I say, it's much more of in terms of gameplay of being like something like a front mission or a tactics ogre where it's all on a on the 45-degree angle. Like the maps aren't as big, and there's a lot more focus on like the story and characters from what I've seen. It's a very different kind of game, but the music itself is no less fucking amazing. So I don't know, have either of you tried out the second game at all, or had a look at it at all?
I have not.
Yeah, because like to me it seems even less known than the first one. And there's actually like look, I was looking at the Wikipedia before, and I knew about the game called Ronde, which was like the a sort of a spiritual sequel to this that was on the Sega Saturn, and again it was Japan only. But it also got 2 mobile games that were sort of like on like an early feature phone type games. And it's good to see some of those actually come to think of it, like, because I think I saw that they're both being released on Switch in Japan. That there's now a bit of a movement to preserve all these old mobile games and smartphone games, or not smartphone games, but like pre-smartphone games. Many of which were like Japan exclusive and never came out in the West because we just didn't have that sort of phone culture.
Yeah.
For sure.
The Ronde soundtrack took me a while to track it down because it's never gotten released, but well worth listening to. I would definitely recommend it. I didn't include it here just because it's not the same composer. But if you're looking for some good music on a sort of a Megami Tensei related strategy RPG, there are worse places to go than Ronde.
Yeah, that's the only good thing about the game.
Are you familiar with it at all? Or?
Yeah, it's not great.
Not. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, here's a Japan only RPG on the Saturn. Like, it's either going to be the best game nobody's ever played, or it's just going to be trashed.
Yeah, it's one of those, and that was during my playing through all of the Super Robot games without translations era. So I was getting very used to playing strategy RPGs without knowing what was happening. And having to use good old game FAQs guides that had the full translation and stuff. But yeah, no, you're right. They're usually either like complete bangers or nobody cares about them. It makes me think of stuff like Dual Orb, or because I don't know if we ever got a translation of Dual Orb 2 over here, and I also don't think anybody cares.
Yeah. And especially on the Saturn, when like your other option for a Megami Tensei game is fucking Soul Hackers, which is one of the bangers of all time as far as fucking Megami Tensei games go. I fucking love that game, and I will absolutely be doing a fucking episode on that soundtrack one day in the future.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the sort of like even games that they release over here that kind of got shitty mobile ports for a while. It's or sort of like the shitty mobile versions of the game. It's interesting, that sort of library of stuff that's very hard to access, because now it's just like your game cannot exist on any I don't know how it is internationally, but any North American platform, has to be the worst gotcha microtransaction ad-filled dog shit you've ever played for it to exist longer than a couple of days. So it's fascinating to me that it's sort of like what was pretty considered, pretty low level games, I think, at the time, having this movement to have them preserved and sort of respected, where even if it's, they was not the best of the best in terms of gaming overall, there's, you find out that there is a lot of interesting things in terms of it being part of the series, or just, as we've seen, the music. So yeah,
absolutely. And like things are worth preserving for their own sake and not just for like curation or whatever.
I absolutely agree, but I have seeded the destruction of the destruction of creations so completely that when people say that, I was like, oh no, yeah, I do think that, but well, we're never. That's never happening.
Yeah,
it's all dying. Embrace death.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think we're going to jump on to this last block of tracks. So these are all from Majin Tensei 2. So we have Outtalk, Theme of Endless, Parting.exe, Sourpuss, and in another great title, Eurythmic Battle. again, a lot of the same samples coming over in this soundtrack. Like it definitely feels like it's in the same sort of universe, but like the first two tracks in particular are a lot sort of slower. They're a lot more thematic. They have their like driving bass lines and stuff, but it's definitely not as sort of propulsive as the battle music that you're going to hear. And that's mostly just because there's all that extra dialogue stuff, and there's definitely a lot more sort of character to the game. And it's just a lot more story forward. But I like I like the setting a little bit more. It's a little bit closer to like to that sort of like technomancy stuff that we've mentioned, whereas like because the sort of the post-apocalypse you're in the first game is so far in the future that sort of like a lot of nature has started to come back into it, and that's sort of interesting in its own right. But I do like one of the things I like about this is that sort of like urban fantasy, where things generally are set in modern day, or as nearest to modern day as it might as well be modern day. I think the second game is set in like 1995, whereas the first game is set in like 2020X, as many games in the 80s were.
Yeah.
Yes, 20XX.
I love a good 20XX. Where it's like, yeah. But yeah, I like the soundtrack throughout again. Really, really good. I love Eurythmic Battle. I wish it was longer. It's so good. It's just like, just fucking good, great synths. I just love it. And again, like you were saying during the break as well, Shannon, just of like, it really sort of boggles the mind how good they were able to get the Super Nintendo to sound, and so different from everything on the system as well.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful sounding soundtrack on both cases, right? Like we got to hear some of the softer, less aggressive sounds with the second game, specifically some piano samples that were just wonderful.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
Yes. Gorgeous is a good word. I was listening and I talked a lot less because I was just so relaxed by the songs, It was a good, it's like aftercare after a really intense listening of all the tough synths and stuff. And now we're down with a nice cup of tea, relaxing,
100%.
Yeah. That's good shit. Yeah, I think we'll start to wrap up there, but any final thoughts, Reese? Give us your wisdom.
It's a great soundtrack. I don't know. I mean, it's incredible. I don't really have anything else kind of to add to what I've already said. But it's I got it paused on my other monitor right now, so I definitely kind of want to go through it a bit. It seems like a great game to go in spurts.
Yeah, it's good, like, because you can turn it on, just play a couple of turns, and then save and quit out. Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Right, well, again, thank you so much for joining us, Shannon, again, on short notice. It was really good to have you back on. I know we've talked before about doing a Shin Megami Tensei 4 episode and also a Shadow Hearts episode. So I'm definitely going to be bothering you to come back for those at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Have you anything you want to plug?
Yeah. So the Misplaced Musings podcast, which you can find on iTunes and various podcatchers. We haven't updated in like 8 months, but we do have like 30 episodes in the backlog. So, you can listen as we discuss random video game news. My podcast partner, Brian, who's been on this podcast as well.
Yeah.
I think about Ace Combat, right?
No, it was that Dreamcast game. Oh, what was it called? I'm too tired at this stage now to be remembering what the fucking name of that game was. Air Force Delta?
Sorry to put you on the spot. Oh, Air Force Delta sounds
Air Force Delta, that was it, yeah. We have had an Ace Combat episode, but Brian was like, I don't want to do Ace Combat, I want to do this because Like with me as well. I just like nobody knows about this, so I want the world to know about about Air Force Delta, which he was dead right to do, because that was actually ended up being one of like my favorite discoveries because of this podcast. Was just like when Brian brought that soundtrack to me, and I was like, holy shit, this fucking rules.
Yeah, it's very good. I'm always happy to be on. And actually, almost every episode I've been on has been about like a sad RPG. Pretty soon, everybody's just gonna think I like depressing things.
It's just a depressing RPG, and like Shadow Hearts isn't going to change that one.
Nor is SMT4.
That's true. Yeah.
One's depressed samurais, one's a depressed punchy boy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Reese, what do you got going on? Where can people find you online?
You can find my podcasts at Video Games Are the Worst Thing on Earth, where we're unhinged and leftist about video game news and culture. And I also have a personal podcast, Existential Warfare, which is going to get another episode one of these days, I promise. It's much like Misplaced Musings. I haven't uploaded an episode in 8 months, but I only have 3 episodes. So we'll get that going. Check those both out.
Fantastic. All right. Yeah, and as for ourselves, I'm not really on Twitter anymore. I very rarely check it, but if you want to interact with the podcast, go to Blue Sky. I think everybody's moving to Blue Sky now again. I never really left there, so nothing's changed for me in that regard. But yeah, go to Blue Sky. You can follow me at Sourpuss. You can follow the podcast at CRT Sound System. We are on Patreon if you want to get these episodes in higher quality and get some bonus episodes. You can find them over patreon.com/CRT Sound System. The bonus episodes are actually up for the public for anyone to download. So even if you don't want to or can't afford to support us, you can still get those bonus episodes for free, because I don't want to sort of restrict content just to people who are paying us money. Yeah, and you can come and join us in the Discord. There'll be a link at the in the show notes, and also come on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If you have a soundtrack you really want to talk about, come talk about it with us. We will absolutely sit and bullshit for 2 hours about anything.
Yeah. This is if you want to convert 2 people to your absolutely crazy niche game, this is the podcast to be on. If you want to convert Tom and
I. Indeed. All right, so the last track we're going to leave with is another arrangement from that Best Selection Megami Sekai Megaten World arrangements album. It's just the track Pallid Tears. Yeah, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining us, Shannon, and thank you, Reese.
Thank you, Tom.
Good night.